All right, fantastic. All right, so hello everyone, welcome to our webinar. My name is Eugene Kwok. I'm a farmland owner in Orange County. I'm also serving as a co-convener of the Hudson Valley Farmland Stewards, along with Helen Marsh. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. I'm really grateful for an amazing turnout today. And I'm also really thrilled to have two distinguished guest speakers to share their knowledge and experience for us today. First, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. First, I'd like to ask everyone to please mute yourself and please use the chat function on the bottom to share any comments or questions. Helen and I will have closely monitor all of the questions and we'll address them towards the end of the presentation. And second of all, I'd like to inform everyone that this webinar is being recorded for archiving purposes, and also it's providing a resource for those who could not join us today. And lastly, I'd like to ask everyone to use the chat button to introduce yourself. I encourage you to please share your name, which county you're joining us from, and also whether you're a farm landowner or farmer or an affiliated organization. So while you're introducing yourself, I'd like to take a moment, just a brief moment to introduce our group, the Hudson Valley Farmland Stewards. So our group began in 2022 as a pilot project through the American Farmland Trust and Glynwood as a series of workshops that focused on the non-operating landowners. So non-operating landowners is defined as a farm landowners who are not themselves a farmer. And that opportunity provided us with a great community building. So the first core member of the first cohort continue to convene, and we have expanded to a larger group and included more farm landowners across the region. And now we're independently organized group, and we're proud to say that over the past years that we have hosted multiple successful webinars, in-person meetings and events. But most importantly, last year, we have established a distinctive identity to formalize our work under the name of the Hudson Valley Farmland Stewards. So our group is guided by agroecological principles, and we're committed to fostering a thriving partnership with farmers in the region. And through education, collaboration, and community building, our mission is to empower farmland owners to steward their land for economic, environmental, and social good, while strengthening our local and regional food system. So with that mission, webinars like today is our ongoing effort to share knowledge and build community. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Helen to share more about today's webinar.
Thank you, Eugene. So last year we received feedback from the farmland owners in our group that they wanted to hear more directly from farmers to understand the farming landscape better and to help them envisage new or additional farm enterprises on the land they steward. So we decided to focus our educational efforts this year on meeting farmers through webinars and in-person gatherings. And today we have just one farmer because we felt it was important to provide sort of an overview before that started. So we hope to include more farmers from different sectors at our next meetings. And thank you all for participating, and we welcome your feedback. And back to you, Eugene.
Thank you, Helen. So I'd like to introduce our first guest speaker, Megan. I've known Megan for such a long time. It's been about a decade knowing her. And I know that she's a trooper, trailblazer in our regional food system. So first, I'd like to share her bio. So Megan is a senior director of programs at Glynwood. She leads Glynwood's program with focused on collaborative, community-centered projects that build relationship necessary for systemic change. Previously, Megan was a director of strategic initiatives and community outreach for Slow Food USA. Megan holds PhD in anthropology from University of Exeter, where her research focused on regional food and farming advocates in Hudson Valley, where she currently serves as a fellow at the Center of Rural Policy Research. She also earned her master's degree with distinction in anthropology from University of London, where her research focused on seed exchange, first generation woman farmers, and food heritage. Her broad range of experience in food and agriculture, including 10 years as a restaurant professional, farmers market manager, and community garden organizer, inspire Megan's continued determination to build more just and joyful food systems. So here we go, Megan. Thank you so much for joining us today, Megan.
Thank you so much, Eugene and Helene, for this gracious invitation. And it's wonderful to see so many folks in attendance with such a wide range of experience and expertise in this field. So hopefully, I will be able to share some things that are interesting and perhaps a little new to you. I am sure many of the things I'll share with you will be familiar. I've been invited to speak a bit about overall trends in farmers and farming in the Hudson Valley and what makes our region unique. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to try to leave plenty of time for us to have some questions and discussions as well, because this group really has quite a lot to share. So let me, I have a couple slides. I'm going to just share my screen. All right. Let me, oops. Always seems easier than it is in practice. Okay. Can folks see that all right? Great. So as Eugene mentioned, I'm from the Glynwood Center for Regional Food and Farming. The Hudson Valley, where Glynwood bases its work and where we do all of our direct support for farmers and where you all are located, is a really unique region for many reasons. I'm going to talk first a little bit about the actual farm operations here. On this slide is a quote from the Profile of Agriculture in New York State, which synthesized the USDA's most recent 2022 Census of Agriculture to pull some of these demographics. And so in it, you can see that the number of farms has increased since the 2017 census, though the size of those farms has decreased, which is an interesting development, unlike the rest of the nation. And that our region, even within New York State, is very much unlike other New York State farming regions, by which I mean dairy is not a major commodity for us. Um, but fruit is, animal products, especially equine products, are also a large percentage, both by acreage and by value. And many of our farms are well known for their fruit, trees, nuts, and berries. I also want to point out that what is not particularly captured in this statistical analysis of the Hudson Valley is something that you all have probably experienced in your role as farm supporters. Excuse me, sorry, I'm getting over a cold. Which is that there are a large number of diversified vegetable and direct to market farms here in the Hudson Valley. So, who are the people on these farms? The average age of farmers in the Hudson Valley is 56.7, again, according to that census data. This broadly tracks with the age of farmers across the nation, while it is true that there is a massive land transfer underway in our lifetime as legacy farmers and multi-generational farmers retire and move that land into other hands. This number actually in the 20 plus years I've been looking at it has gone down. So there is a influx of younger people into farming. This is particularly true in the Hudson Valley. And so despite this middle-aged age as being the average age of farmers here, in Dutchess County, for example, 20% of farmers are 34 or younger. So there really is nationally recognized a concentration of new entry and younger farmers here in the Hudson Valley. These new entry farmers are often people coming from urban centers. They're drawn to the Hudson Valley both because of the training opportunities that we offer here for entrant farmers, including Glynwood's own apprenticeship and the decentralized Hudson Valley apprenticeship that we run, as well as um, trainings through Grow NYC and Stone Barns and others that have existed over the years. They tend to be college educated and they tend to want to work collaboratively, meaning they want to work within communities, within systems. They don't necessarily align with the sort of Jeffersonian single family unit, family farm entity that tends to kind of dominate our thinking about what farms look like in America. And they tend to want to practice ecologically. And I use that term rather than necessarily organic or regenerative because there are many different ways that that expresses itself from farmers who are particularly interested in creating a lot of crop diversity or in soil health or in rotational grazing. But broadly speaking, uh, new entry farmers are less likely in the Hudson Valley to want to go into commodity scale or conventional practice farming. Another thing that is worth noting about the demographics of farmers here in the Hudson Valley is that we do have long-standing Latinx and Black agricultural laboring communities. The majority of farmers who are hiring migrant or seasonal work are often, those folks that they're hiring are often coming from Mexico and other countries in Central America. Many of them have worked here for decades on the same farms. That would be the vegetable farms I'm speaking about specifically, vegetable and dairy farms. And then when we look to the iconic historic orchards of the Hudson Valley, many of those people who are working that land are coming here from Jamaica and returning to Jamaica in the winter or living year round, but have come from that Jamaican background. And the expertise that these communities have built of this land over decades, over generations, is also now and in a more emergent trend, leading them into farm ownership and being owner operators of their own farm businesses, which is something we see as a really positive um, growth in the new entry sector for farmers. Also unique nationally and even internationally is the organization of LGBTQIA plus identifying people within the farm community in the Hudson Valley. So this is, in the work that I've done with colleagues in Europe and other parts of the United States, there really is something particularly unique about the concentration of LGBTQIA identifying out and proud farms and farmers in the Hudson Valley. Just going to check the chat to make sure I haven't missed anything. Great. Okay. So, as Eugene mentioned, I am an anthropologist, and the social world of farming is something I'm very passionate about, the social fabric, which is as critical to the success of farmers as the geography and the soil types. And so I want to talk a little bit about the way that the Hudson Valley has been shaped and defined by land and legacy. So prior to colonization, indigenous communities were abundant in the Hudson Valley and have a long history of trade routes and various territorial negotiations and movements up and down the Hudson River. During the colonial period, when indigenous peoples were largely forced from their lands, we saw settlers putting up small holdings along the river of the Hudson Valley. These were primarily subsistence farms, not really commercial farms. As commercial farms began to build, there was a heavy reliance on enslaved labor. This looked differently than what you might imagine the plantations in the South to have looked like. Households generally had a smaller number of enslaved peoples with them, and were working smaller plots, but the uh, percentage of enslaved peoples in the Hudson Valleys was not that different population-wise to the percentage of enslaved peoples in the South. Um, so as these farms became more profit generating, they also did that alongside the river towns, which really were understood to be trade depots on this trade canal, the Hudson River, that had long been established by the indigenous peoples, by fur trappers, by the East India Trading Company. And so part of why I want to bring this up is that we often think of the Hudson Valley as a fundamentally agricultural place, but its rural character really was built around trade with the harbor of Manhattan at the sort of anchor point of that trade. And this has left a real footprint on the way our agricultural communities have developed comparative to other places in the country. We tend to have much smaller plots of land that were less centralized. This is partly because of the geography, that, it's rockier and hillier here than out in the Great Plains. But also partly because that was the social fabric was for trading. It was not these large, expansive rural towns. It was always sort of mixed use, if you want to think of it that way. So in the 19th and 20th centuries, we see intense industrialization. Food production does increase as the population increases in the Hudson Valley, and trade really, really increases. And some of this industrialization would have been lumbering, mining, brick production, paper production that had disastrous consequences for the landscape and the waters of the Hudson Valley. Excuse me. Um, and of course, along with that industrialization, I'm so sorry, just one moment. I'm just going to mute myself for
Get some
along with
water.
I know I need to get some water. I should have got it before this meeting. I promise I think I'll make it through. I think I'll be all right. Um, so along with that industrialization and the impact on the environment, we see a backlash to that industrialization, right? Which really births the idea of land conservation, that we don't want the rivers muddied by the effluents from lumbering. We want these rivers to be pristine, and they're held up as um, a place of health, of wildness in opposition to New York City and to the increasingly deteriorating conditions of the tenements and the slums in New York City. So this is what starts to build Hudson Valley's reputation also as a place for recreation, a place for tourism, right? This kind of landscape tourism. Both of these things, both the industrialization and increase of food production and the conservation movement actually act to consolidate land holdings, right? So smaller plots are brought together. Smaller plots are brought together both to build Gilded Ages estates and to establish conservation lands. Alongside this, during this period, we're seeing the globalization of food production and suburbanization. Both of these undermine the agricultural livelihoods in the Hudson Valley. Globalization of food production is bringing cheaper crops into that New York City harbor. Also, the advent of trains and cold storage is bringing food from the other side of the country to compete with the production here in New York. Suburbanization has the effect of increasing the cost of land that was previously more accessible for agriculture. So this is the period, the 60s up until present day, when the development costs of an apple orchard, for example, or sorry, the amount a developer would pay for the land an apple orchard sits on is significantly more than a farmer could ever hope to recoup by selling those same apples in local markets. So now, here in the 21st century, we continue to see that rise in development pressure. I'm sure everyone's very aware of how housing prices and land prices increased exponentially from 2020 forward. At the same time, beginning at the end of last century and into this century, we're seeing a really pronounced interest in local markets, how food, but other products, but certainly food, can become relocalized. And we're also seeing a really wonderful development that the conservation ethos, which had from its founding in the 19th century, really been about protecting land from humans, keeping humans away from the land, is turning to understand the purpose of working lands in uh, a thriving ecosystem. So we see these conservation organizations start to invest in farms and working lands as well. So all of that is just some background to discuss the opportunities and challenges that present themselves for new entry farmers coming into the Hudson Valley. On the left here, we have the opportunities, proximity to the New York City markets. That means certainly the green markets, but also the restaurant market, and even the import-export market, right? There is no greater financial hub than New York City in this country, and certainly the amount of food purchased, procured, and eaten there has plenty of room to sustain far more farmers than we have in the Hudson Valley. There is also here in the Hudson Valley a long legacy of conservation and philanthropy, which has helped to build an infrastructure of technical assistance. And what I mean like that about by that is, folks in our farmer training programs at Glynwood, also colleagues from Berkshire Ag Ventures, from Hudson Valley Agribusiness Development Corps, from the various Cornell Cooperative Extension offices. There is a broad range of expertise for new entry farmers to draw on as they build their farm businesses. That same philanthropy that I mentioned that is so critical in taking down some of the financial barriers as well as some of the educational barriers for new farmers. And New York City is obviously also the investment capital of the world. So having like-minded and creative financial investors who are able to support some of these farm businesses in that way. There also is a really critical community connection. So for farmers who maybe don't look like the stereotypical white nuclear family, uh, having community connections that they can maintain in that New York City urban metro area as they move into rural spaces that may um, seem less welcoming or more intimidating for them can be really meaningful. I know any number of farmers who commute from homes in the Bronx or elsewhere to their farmland up in the Hudson Valley to maintain those community connections, or if they've decided to relocate to the Hudson Valley, will continue to bring food back to those communities. And that's a really meaningful part of sustaining their mental health. Some of the big challenges in the Hudson Valley that are uh, unique to us, again, compared to other parts of the country, the exorbitantly high cost of land and also the intense housing crisis we're facing. Again, I can tell many anecdotes of farms who were established in the last 15 years of incredible new entry farmer growth in the Hudson Valley, running successful businesses and unable to expand because their employees can't secure housing that they can afford on the wage that the farm is able to offer. So uh, that as well as farmers themselves not being able to find homes that they can afford on what they're able to produce through their farm. Um, Another challenge here is the poor transportation and cold storage infrastructure. So we don't have excellent coordinated delivery into the city. The reliance on direct-to-consumer sales through green markets and CSAs often means very, very long days for these farmers and high um, transportation costs. There are many groups working on this solution, lots of innovative and exciting things coming forward, but it certainly is a challenge right now. We also have poor processing infrastructure. So we don't have a facility right now that is able to take in crops from smaller farms, process them into frozen products. Though one is looking to come online. We don't have a bean canning facility in New York State, which is a challenge for some of our bean growers. And just in general, preserving that harvest is something that's really needed. There is also a high labor demand. Folks, particularly livestock farmers, have a lot of trouble finding the trained and talented and committed people that they need to work on their operations. So, yeah, it's a lot of opportunity and a lot of promise, but not insignificant challenges for these new entry farmers to face. So I'm going to stop there. And I would love to hear if the things that I'm reflecting to you from my experience and research are resonating, if you've seen things that significantly differ, or if there are any questions you'd like to follow up with me on.
So, Megan, sorry to interrupt you. I
Not at
wonder if
all.
you wouldn't mind if we hold the questions until
Oh,
after
sure.
Max has spoken, if that's okay with you.
Of course, perfectly fine. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. That was a really informative presentation. So much great content for conversation afterwards. So, with that, I'm going to introduce Max Morningstar. Max and his wife Maria co-own a 50-acre organic vegetable farm and retail store in Claverack, New York. So, for those of you who haven't been to the farm store, we really encourage you to do so. It's a fantastic store that sells many local products beyond what the farm itself produces. And Max has been farming for 20 years. He brings a no-nonsense practical approach to Morningstar Farm, which is upheld as one of the most successful farm businesses in the Hudson Valley. And I particularly like this quote from an interview a few years ago with Canvas Rebel, which nicely sums up Max's approach. Quote, "The small farm regenerative farm world has always been plagued by poor service and quality guys behind a story that sounds like this. The rest of the industry is evil, and we aren't evil, so you need to deal with our low quality and unprofessional attitude, because if you don't, you are a bad person and you are killing the planet. Unfortunately, our industry needs to grow out of this if we want to make any real difference in the world." Unquote. So with that, over to you, Max. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for joining me, and thanks for the intro. It sums us up pretty well. As Helene said, we run a 50-acre organic vegetable farm here in Claverick. We started the farm back in 2014 on leased ground in Copake, New York, where we farmed for 5 years before moving to our current operation in Claverick. We were farming on a similar scale at that operation, growing about 40, 50 acres worth of vegetable crops, including some cover crop land, primarily for wholesale markets and one farmer's market. Currently, we still sell the majority of our crops leave the farm through wholesale channels, though the majority of our income comes in through our on-site retail store. So we moved to Claverick in 2019 and opened the store technically in 2019, but really it was 2020. Opened the store, which is now a year-round, 7-day a week kind of specialty food store that we operate. And that has been one of the biggest changes in how we manage our operation, and the financial realities shifting for us was almost supplementing the farm income with a retail operation. We dropped out of our farmers markets to help facilitate growing more for the store, and we still are selling a lot of crops through wholesale channels, primarily root crops, potatoes, winter squash, and sweet potatoes. One of our biggest areas of growth for these crops is actually selling to other farms in the Hudson Valley, which is a major part of our wholesale operation. So smaller farms that don't have the acreage or the machinery to produce storage crops, or winter squash or potatoes, any of these somewhat difficult crops to grow. They will source them from us for their CSA or farm stores or markets or wherever they're moving them. So it's a major component for us working within that community. So after leasing land and moving to this farm, we had a lease with an option to purchase on this farm that I worked out with the owner, who had started courting several years before we actually moved here. And we closed on the farm in September of 2021, just short of our 3-year contract being up, which was perfect. And so we now own this home farm. We also lease land down the road in Livingston, New York, which is something we're always poking around for. Some of the challenges we've faced that Megan alluded to are all things we've dealt with: high cost of housing, and how that is directly linked to having to source our labor through the H-2A visa program with a mobile home that came with the property when we closed on it, um, which hadn't really been our intention. We had always hired locally and had really good luck with these local crews, but after the COVID housing boom in Columbia County, it was just nearly impossible to find enough people to run the operation that we're running now. It's vegetable production is a very high labor. Vegetable and fruit is very high hand labor industry. And though we're fairly mechanized and run a fairly lean crew for a farm our scale, labor is still our number one cost. So that housing issue is definitely something we've felt and have had to pivot and go a direction we hadn't necessarily planned on going in the future. Kind of pivot to it right away. Um, I'm trying to steer this, and Helene, you can help me if you want, if there's any particular area beyond my experience as a grower that you think people would like to hear. But the as I mentioned, the opening of a retail store was a big component of where we are now and why our business has scaled the way it has. And part of that uh, came from the ability to own our farm, which was a really important piece of um, allowing us to succeed and kind of reach where we are today is the opportunity we had to buy this farm, which some of it was luck and some of it was the attitude we took towards farming. I had been farming in Massachusetts for about 10 years before moving here, and we started a fairly aggressive we were fairly aggressive as a startup farming 20 acres of crops our first year and with the intention of expanding beyond that because my experience had told me that the only way we were ever going to make this work from a lifestyle perspective, a life quality perspective for not just me but the people who work with me was to really scale this business up and really try to grow a lot of food and sell a lot of food was the only way we were going to make the finances of this work. And it was one of the things that kind of allowed us to position ourselves um, to buy this farm. This was helped by the fact that the lease we had picked up in Copake was a fairly expensive lease. We were leasing our house and limited infrastructure and farmland all from one organization. And it kind of primed us cash flow wise to be able to afford the mortgage on the farm we had, which again was a pretty important piece when it came to actually financing a piece of land, which we did through the USDA. Um, so all of these things kind of inform each other. Another major part of that move when we were assessing the lease versus the owning was the availability of infrastructure. We had outgrown the two bay garage and shipping container coolers that we had on that farm, and we really said, okay, um, if we're going to take this to the next level, we're going to need a barn. We're going to need a much bigger cooler. We're going to need a much bigger wash and pack room. A lot of people think of agriculture as what they see out in the field, but especially as a vegetable farmer, um, there is a whole lot of back of the house infrastructure that goes into producing this food at the quality standard that we try to hit and at the volume we need to hit in order to make any money. And so we said, well, does it really make sense to spend, $500,000 building a barn on land we don't own? Maybe we'd be able to sell it to a future farmer. Maybe the organization would buy it, but it felt like a really big gamble. And so we were really lucky to find a farm that had some of these kind of needed a lot of work, the farm we're on, but ultimately it had the bones and the framework for what we needed to grow crops at scale. And so um, fast forward to now, about 80% of the food we grow leaves the farm wholesale channels and to other farms, primarily in the tri-state area. And So if you were to look at my farm, the majority of the produce we produce by weight leaves the farm through those wholesale channels. But the majority of our income comes from our retail store, which is, kind of what we're best known for now, though that wasn't how it started. So we've faced a lot of challenges and a lot of shifting expectations over the years, and have managed to pivot with them, and adapt to it. And we're very very thankful that we're in an area like the Hudson Valley, despite the challenges that Megan alluded to. So.
So, Max, could I interrupt you and just ask you to elaborate a little bit on the issue of the leasing? And because so much farmland is leased in the Hudson Valley, I wonder if you could just comment a little bit on what sort of um, what sort of experiences and challenges you encountered when you were leasing land, and what can you tell our group about some of the things to think about as you think, as we consider leasing land to farmers, what is your perspective on all of this?
Yeah, the leasing issue, it kind of depends on uh, where the headspace is at. I think that, and I remember when we were leading up to this talk, we checked in about, we chatted a little bit about this. One of the issues you run into in the broader, kind of economic lens of agriculture in the Hudson Valley is that most of us, as we start to think long term, are planning to retire on equity. Essentially, we're using the land to pay for the land and build a business that we can then sell so that we can retire and stop farming. And that is something that, everybody's going to have to address eventually, whether they want to or not. They're going to have to stop farming, and very few of us are making enough money at our business that we're squirreling away, a big pile of money so that we can get out, via more traditional route of retirement savings and 401k. Um, so when it came to leasing and we started looking at the, reality that we were facing in Copake, which was, again, we were spending $35,000 a year, or $30,000 a year renting a farm and a house and a garage. Um, and so for us, leasing really didn't make sense in that kind of a, you know, that kind of a scenario. It wasn't hard for me to reverse engineer that into a mortgage payment. Um, and so given what we needed to do and what was available to us, it made the most sense for us to move on to, purchasing. So the struggle with leasing for some growers in the long term is, um, what are they building for themselves, right? Where's the equity coming from? Where's the long-term strategy to get out? Because ultimately the if we're serious about local food, we're going to have to figure out a way for, um, people to make this work financially. It's not going to work if we think that we can make significant shifts in local food, by just continually finding new martyrs to, retire poor. Um, so, figuring out the balance between lease expenses and how that's affecting the bottom line, I think is one of the most difficult things to figure out in this relationship between landowners and lessees. Infrastructure is another component of it, where it's a very difficult, and I probably don't have enough experience to say I have a solution to this, but, who's paying for what and what are the expectations, that landowners have on that farmland for, the growers that are there. There are lots of farm landowners who love the idea of their land being farmed and not paying property taxes on that land. Um, but they don't love the idea of the bones of an operation being on that farm. Greenhouses, barns, farm trucks, equipment, early morning crews. So there's a lot of expectation management, as well as some financial realities overcome for farmers who want to lease. I think leasing is a great option for people to get started, um, because low cost, that we need low cost entry for people for the majority of people who are getting into farming. Um, but I don't see it. I see leasing as more of an incubator than a long-term solution in a lot of cases, uh, with the exception of some kind of Cinderella story leases that I have seen those success stories of people who are able to make enough money because they don't have a land expense like I do. If I could funnel my mortgage payments into a retirement fund because I didn't have any of those payments, this could really work long term as a lease. Um, but I haven't seen very many of those things pop up.
Okay, thank you very much, Max. That was really very informative. I think we should open up the meeting to questions. So if you could please put your questions into the chat, and we'll start to monitor those. While you do that, I think the question that I'd like to start off with, Max, is this issue of food access from the perspective of the cost associated with producing really high quality, in your case, organic food, but let's call it, generally high quality food. And the fact that because of that cost, it's not accessible to many people who are in a lower income bracket. So maybe you could comment on that.
Yeah, it's a challenge that vexes us all the time. Is and one of the ways we've kind of approached it is again going back to scale. I think there's a lot of difficulty in there's an inherent boutique nature to the small farm, and they kind of exist in this environment to serve a certain segment of the population because the costs are so high. So it's kind of a luxury item. I think there are ways to. We've worked with Berkshire Agricole or with Berkshire Grown in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, over the last several years, um, through a Share the Bounty program where they purchase crops from us wholesale and then distribute that in lower income communities, either for free or at discounted rates, and they're buying that with state funds. And that has been a brilliant program for us and a lot of other growers. The trick is how do you keep the funding steady, which is something they've dealt with too. Is when it's done kind of piecemeal through grants or temporary funding measures in the legislature. There's no way for them to invest. They don't have a loading dock. They don't have a forklift. They don't have a place that they can take a really large delivery of crops and hold it, and distribute it over you know, a long period of time because they don't have solid funding. They don't know that that's going to be there in 6 months. So they're taking all the money that they get and they're using it to buy food and distribute it, and that's great, but it also limits what they're able to do long term. So investing in groups that are able to purchase food locally and then distribute it locally, I think is a really great way to kind of increase the access. Um, and the other way to do it is kind of dealing with the real economics of producing food in the Hudson Valley, which is it's very expensive to do it here. Labor is expensive, housing's expensive, utilities are expensive. It's not it's not a high profit industry. And so we don't have a lot to give away on our end. And if there is a way, whether it's, though I don't generally think that, giving away money to artificially lower the cost of things is necessarily the way to do it. That is a strategy through subsidies, similar to what we have for commodity growers, for fruit and vegetable growers. Though I think it needs to be carefully applied and make sure that the money's really going to the right place, and a place where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. coming out of it. So it's a complicated problem, but like most of the problems we've faced in this industry, it's mostly about money.
Thank you, Max. There's a question to Megan. Rebecca is asking, could you please discuss in more detail the current initiatives for processing and cold storage?
Sure, I absolutely, and I love just to respond quickly to what Max was sharing about food accessibility as well. I mentioned that a lot of the farmers we work with are coming into this sector with very community-based, idealistic motivations and are setting their businesses up with pretty creative business models outside of like the traditional LLC for a number of reasons, including that equity investment. But one primary trend that we've noticed is farmers wanting to be able to give their food away to provide greater food security for their communities or to really push back against the idea that their food is for only for fancy people to be to be crass about it. And that's not at all out of a naivete about the production costs, which Max is right, are very high, and the price being charged at retail is fair for these products. So some of the solutions I've seen that I'd like to for this group to think about and consider are coming through that nonprofit and philanthropic and legislative sector, such as the New York Food for New York Families funding that is now lapsed, but was putting hundreds of thousands of dollars towards emergency feeding from very small farms who are able to deliver it in small batches without that large warehousing um, expense that is often part of making food more accessible. Uh, and program Glynwood runs, the Food Sovereignty Fund does just that, matches farms directly to emergency food, community feeding programs. We also have worked with CSA farmers to accept SNAP dollars. So really leaning into some of these um, government subsidies, which are necessary with hunger being the persistent issue that it is in this country. Okay, I just wanted to tack that on there really quickly that it's an impossible problem for the farmers to solve, but it's one that collective efforts, I think, really can make a big difference in. Um, yeah, so there's lots of energy around aggregation, processing, and distribution in the Hudson Valley right now. I can talk about a few projects that I'm aware of. In Kingston, the Farm Hub has been um, working on a project called the Crop Shop um, that will be coming online, I believe, in the next year or two, and that will be specifically for processing fresh produce into frozen and canned produce. So that's a project that is really exciting to see moving forward. Um, that may be the only like direct processing project that I'm aware of. Distribution projects are somewhat more common. There's a collective led by Steph Wiley and others that goes by the BQE, which stands for the Black Queer Expressway, which is a collective of Black and queer farmers that are pooling their resources to aggregate delivery and distribution to restaurants and communities in New York City. There are a couple of infrastructure grants open right now that I know several farmers are applying for to the premise is that they will create cold storage centers in Westchester County or somewhere closer to the city so that farmers can just drop off their product there. And then a sales representative, basically, who is living in that area, lives closer to the city, can do that last mile delivery either to farmers market stands or to wholesale accounts. So those are some of the piecemeal ways that it's coming together. There are also there's also a lot of interest in various aggregation centers. So in the Weebatuck Valley, in far eastern Dutchess County, the Weebatuck Valley Growers Collective is building a processing center that will do some value add products, but also will aggregate from the several farms that are partnering in that. I know they're running a capital campaign right now, and I'm happy to share that with this group. They would greatly benefit from some support there. Um, we are at Glynwood building a micro granary that will store and distribute small grains, beans, and other dried food staples for farmers that are just entering that market. Likewise, Farm Hub in Hurley has built a really impressive milling process that is launched as its own business that will be able to mill a significant amount of flour, though the volume of that I think our producers are still coming up to speed on. So those are just some of the interesting infrastructure things that are happening. Right now, it's a lot of piecemeal solutions with farmers either driving their own vans or hiring out trucking companies to help them get their food where it needs to go.
Great.
Um,
Thank you, Megan. Max, did you want to add to
I
that?
just wanted to answer Leanna's question about the certified organic,
Sure.
which on my end, certified organic is about access to market, about being able to use the word in the store. That's less important, but ultimately it's a decision because I have buyers who won't buy our product if it's if I'm not certified organic, I'm conventional, which is a fair. I think that's fair in the market. The consumer needs something that's just black and white. I don't think the onus should be put on them to figure out what's sustainable or not. Um, so our our approach to it is simply that it gives us access to market. It's not necessarily driving our price up, but allows us to sell to markets where we wouldn't normally have access to.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks for that information. I think it's certainly important to understand the current landscape of the organic and the access to and the sales channel. One of the question is alluding to a more broader sort of question. Andy is asking, is there an information resource that can be served as a resource that summarizes farming operations, resources, and community support mechanisms, and etc.? Mm, I believe personally, there wouldn't be any central locations that provides a broader resource, but I would say that there are information that you can piecemeal. So, Megan or Max, do you know any place they can share information?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Yeah. Okay.
Be a great resource, it sounds like.
Yeah. Cynthia is asking, curious what either of you would say about taking on an inexperienced farmer. How likely is a new farmer able to figure out how to run a farm of any kind?
Well, we've hired lots of inexperienced farmers over the years and kind of brought them on. Housing was the ultimate thing that kind of we still hire. We have a year-round team of managers here that are local, not simply the H-2A visa holders, but I think this is a question that's been asked for a long time is how do you gain the experience when the pay is so damn low? We're working for local farms. And I would say we would be likely to hire somebody with limited experience for an entry level job. Um, One of the issues we've run into is that those people tend to, well, we've had pretty good luck, but in the community at large or the industry at large, those tend to be fairly short term. People work for one season or two seasons at this farm and one season at that farm and bounce around a little bit before deciding they're able to go on. And so a lot of us growers are, I don't want to say wary, but kind of approach the relationship between the new hire and them as a very temporary thing. So we're less likely to pour a ton of resources into a relationship that isn't likely to last very long. And so it's not an easy question to answer. But I think there are a lot of growers who are willing to hire people who with less experience. And the best way to approach it as an inexperienced grower is to find a farm that you think you like and then work there for as long as you can and learn as much as you can before moving on to either the next place or your own operation.
Yeah, I would say, there's a lot of nuance in the word farmer that we don't necessarily always pull out, right? So if as a landowner you're thinking of bringing on someone inexperienced as a primary operator of a brand new farming enterprise, I think that's a place where you want to really turn to the many technical assistance options that are out there for you. American Farmland Trust, Lauren Kaplan at Glynwood, who does our farmland matching work, people who can make sure that you're really on the same page about what the um, use of that land is and what the farm business might be. I also, can't resist a shout out to the Hudson Valley Apprenticeship that Glynwood runs. We've been training apprentices for almost 20 years now on our own farm and have expanded that curriculum to 8 farms across the region where we're supporting those farmers in being mentors themselves while they're able to bring on less experienced um, farm workers because they will be augmented by the training they receive over the course of that apprenticeship period. So there are lots of training options out there. And I guess, as Max is saying, if you're looking for someone who can be a seasonal field hand as they gain experience, then there's less of a consideration there. But I do think, for the best interest of the individual as well as a landholder, you really don't want to bring someone on to start a new farm enterprise who doesn't have several seasons of farming under their belt or who isn't already invested in some very um, rigorous training practices to get there and make sure they reach out to that support network.
Yeah, looking at the clarification here, that's I think a mistake a lot of growers make, a lot of young farmers make, is starting their own farm too soon. Um, I worked at a similarly scaled operation to where I'm at now. It was a startup, but I worked there for almost 10 years and had an apprenticeship and another year before that, before coming out to start my own farm. And I still learned a whole lot real fast after starting my own farm. And so, you hear these stories of people saying, "Okay, I was an apprentice and then I worked as an assistant harvest manager for 3 seasons at an operation." And unfortunately, the reality is they really do not have the experience to run their own operation at that point because running your own business is completely different than work. And I was, again, going back to my experience as an employee, um, I was the farm manager. I was making the growing decisions. I owned a bunch of the equipment we used. These were things that, I was a high level manager, and I still had a whole lot to learn about running my own business and managing the other side of not just growing vegetables and selling vegetables, but managing personnel expectations, managing customer relationships, and managing cash flow. So I think it's a mistake a lot of growers make is jumping into their own business too soon. And so I would also caution any landowner before taking on somebody to make sure that they really do have some years of management under their belt before getting into anything long term with them.
Thank you so much for your responses. We have a series of questions which we would continue to address them after this meeting. It's already one. Time really flew by. Thank you so much for both for presenting your experience and your knowledge. I really do appreciate it. And for everyone who has joined, I'm really grateful for your participation. We're going to continue to have these webinars throughout the year, and this is the first part of our Meet Our Farmer series. So please stay tuned, and we will share the recordings of this webinar to everybody. So thank you so much for participating.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.